Hey there, Margie Bryce here, bringing you the Krabby Pastor podcast. And I don't think you're going to be too surprised to know that it's too easy today to become the Krabby Pastor. Our time together will give you food for thought to help you be the ministry leader fully surrendered to God's purposes and living into whatever it takes to get you there and keep you there. So we're talking about sustainability in ministry. Well, I am here today with my friend, Patty Dennis, and Patty and I have worked together for a few years on church revitalization process, and we have also been in coach training together. And the fun thing about Patty, and there's a lot of those, but the fun thing about Patty is that she is also a trained counselor. So I thought it would be valuable to have her on and we can chat a bit about coaching, about counseling, because maybe you've got to the place where you know you need something and you're not quite sure what that something is. So I'm going to introduce you. I'm going to let Patty introduce herself because I don't understand all of the counseling certification things. And so she's going to talk a bit about her background before we have this discussion. So, Patty, I want to welcome you to the Krabby Pastor. This in no way implies that you're crabby. It maybe means that I'm the one that's crabby. I don't know. I still have not unpacked that fully. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself to us.
Well, thank you, Margie. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, my name is Patty, and I spent a lot of years in the field of education. I started out as a teacher, and then I spent 20 years as a school counselor. And so I do have background in adolescents, middle school and high school age students and their families. And I do have a master's in counseling, and I am a licensed professional counselor. After I retired, I got involved in a lot of the stuff that Margie and I have worked on together in terms of being a catalyst for
Catalyst
church
for what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
church improvement and things like that.
Yeah.
And that led me to the coach training. And so it was very fascinating for me to kind of understand the differences between the two. So, and there are some differences, and I think they both have
Sure. And we both are trained through the International Coaching Federation, because I will say this, and I mean this kindly, that there are some people that hang out the shingle that they're a coach, but their training, well, let's just say it this way, International Coaching Federation, their training is extensive, their training is in depth, and you do a lot of hours of that and you have a lot of requirements along the way to meet. So I'll just leave that there, right, Patty?
yes.
and the neat thing about Patty then is that she took her gifts and is using them to serve the church and the ministries of the church. So that was how we kind of connected. So let's start though with counseling, because I know I just did a podcast about counseling and the value of counseling, or when it is you need a counselor. But I kind of want to start us off, I guess, with a recap of some of that. So Patty, I'm going to let you talk about counseling for a moment.
Okay. So counseling is something that we look to when we feel stuck or we feel like we can't move forward on our own. We need support. We need, a safe place to come and talk about issues that are bothering us or that we can't seem to resolve on our own. And so as a counselor, it's our job to, of course, listen carefully, but also, because of our training, provide some particular skills, suggestions, things that might be appropriate or helpful in moving that person forward. And so it's a little bit more directive, or can be a little bit more directive than coaching.
Okay. So then counseling, you're maybe going to say to someone that would come to you, well, I'm going to suggest A, B, or C. And so you have actual solution oriented suggestions for them, whereas coaching is different on that. How?
Yeah, so coaching is very much driven by the person you are coaching. They lead, you follow, you listen, you ask questions designed to help them think through their problem with the belief that that person has within them the ability to do their best thinking about their own life. And so it's providing a space to do that, a dedicated time to do that. We're often very busy and we don't stop to really reflect and do our best thinking. And so the coach can help that person do that through their questions. And then it's up to that individual to then decide what they might choose to do. It's not come from the coach. The coach doesn't say, well, you have A, B, or C. The coach says, well, what do you think would be a first step that you'd be willing to do? And
Okay.
so it's really driven by the person that you're coaching. It's their, and again, it's their belief that they have the best solution for themselves.
Okay. So then counseling, somebody would come to you for counseling, and that would be it is patient driven or client driven, whichever terminology you want to
Correct.
use. But how is then the counselor working differently than the coach?
Counseling also has sometimes a more past focus. We're digging into past issues and childhoods and things like that and trying to make some connections for the individual with that. But the counselor then might make some suggestions about what they could do. Or let's say a patient is estranged from, say, a sibling or a parent, and that's causing a lot of anxiety and hurt. And so the counselor might then come in and say, well, here are a couple of options that you could do. You might want to suggest that you journal about it, or you write a letter and you can choose to send it or not send it, or, whatever it might be. There might be a number of things that the counselor could say, this has worked well in the past for other people. Would you consider doing this?
Okay.
Where a coach would not come up with those.
Okay.
Coach would not suggest those things.
Okay. So if someone has gotten to the place, and this is kind of a big deal, dare I say, especially within the ranks of ministry leaders, to actually
Mhm.
get to the place where they say, I know I need help. I know I need someone to journey with me, to come alongside. I know I'm stuck. And by the way, even just the admission of saying I need help and I need someone to journey with me is an act of humility, because you're saying I can't do this on
Mhm.
my own. And I have to say, in the ranks of ministry leaders, sometimes that's the biggest hurdle. But
Mhm.
at any rate, let's say there is a ministry leader getting to that place saying, I know I need help. I know I need someone to journey with me. How would they know whether they should choose a coach or a counselor? Because in both instances, and I've said this to people, coaching is great if you're stuck and maybe stuck in your own thinking. You're stuck in the rut of your own thinking and you need someone to help you see that there really are more solutions and that you actually know more solutions than what you think, because I'm going to ask you questions in such a way that it's going to help you to hop out of the rut, give you the ladder to crawl out of that rut and see things a little differently so that you can find your own solutions. But if you were talking to a ministry leader that said, I know I need help, I know I need someone to journey with me, how do I decide whether I need a coach or whether I need a counselor?
I would need to know more about the issues to make that
Well,
decision.
that's a good deflection, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I would. I would need to know more as to what my recommendation would be. I think if there's a lot of trauma and a lot of fresh pain and a lot of past histories of hurts that haven't really been talked about or dealt with, that perhaps counseling would be the way to go to kind of just unpack some of that. And then once there's less pain and anxiety attached to those topics, then it allows the person to maybe do a little bit better thinking that would be beneficial in a coaching situation. So if that pastor that, finally says, I need help, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it would depend on what they think they need help about. You know,
Okay.
do I need help about handling the anxiety that's free floating in my congregation? Do I need help about self care? Do I need help about how to set better boundaries? I think those are all appropriate coaching. I mean, not to say that you couldn't do counseling also, but appropriate coaching topics. Whereas if I had childhood trauma, abuse, and more serious things that need to be unpacked that create a lot of emotional angst, I think that perhaps counseling would be the way to go.
That's really interesting. It made me think of a course that I took in seminary from pastoral care and counseling, where we actually went through the book Overcoming the Dark Side of Leadership. And it was like, I felt like I was in high school, with it, because the assignment was to read the chapter and do all the questions at the end of the chapter. And I thought, all right, fine, I can do that. But as we went through the book, or I went through the book, because we all had to do it individually, what surfaced for me was the dark side of leadership, that in my own heart, that because we all have baggage. We all
Mm-hmm.
have baggage. And the piece that this book unveiled for me, I guess is a way to say it, is the fact that my baggage, I need to know what my baggage is and be aware, so that when something sets me off in my head, I can say, oh, it's that again. And then you can process the situation differently. And every single ministry leader has baggage. You need to know what your baggage is and understand that. And actually, it's that very baggage that frequently drives us into leadership, which is a whole nother. I'm sure I've creeped you out tremendously. And I promise I will put the Amazon link to the book in the show notes. But you mentioned anxiety, which I think is like the number one thing. I think the peace that passes understanding that Jesus gives is way under preached in terms of a blessing and grace received from God for us in this anxiety producing era. So you're saying maybe it's not that the only people that have no anxiety are dead. You know what I mean?
Yes,
That's pretty much it. And
agreed.
yeah. So, but you're saying that in coaching, maybe you have some anxiety, but it's not necessarily something rooted in the past that is driving what you do now. Am I in the
No,
ballpark?
not really. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about levels of intensity, I think,
Okay.
more than, there is always going to be that connection from our past and those buttons that get pushed. And the
Mm-hmm.
awareness of those are so helpful, period, right? Whether you get to those through coaching or you get to those through counseling, just that awareness is huge in terms of being able to be a little bit more thoughtful in our responses, to those kinds of things. But I think it's levels of intensity
Mm-hmm.
that really would lean me towards one or the other. The higher the intensity, perhaps the counseling piece, just to kind of level that out a little bit. Because when our intensity is really high, it's really difficult to do our best thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
so, because of that, I think I would go to kind of calming that down, through perhaps counseling where they might just need that supportive person
Mm.
to cry with or to just listen. And, whereas coaching is much more with the idea of doing their best thinking, but to get to an action plan. And
Okay.
how do you get to an action plan when you're just grieving over something, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's not really an action plan per se, but just maybe just letting that loose, letting that out, letting that space to do some of that kind of work that's maybe more conducive with with counseling.
Okay. And because I know that's really solid brain science. When your anxiety levels are really high, your thinking pretty much goes into the proverbial toilet.
Correct.
For sure. And and I've kind of lived that, and you're wondering why you just can't, make some kind of decision. And then some people get anxious about not being able to make that decision. It makes them even more anxious. I mean, you can go down
Correct.
that merry road, but you want your best thinking. You want to be in a place where you can do your best thinking. And it's not that you're going to have no anxiety, but as Patty says, it is levels of anxiety. Is there any way that you can gauge that about yourself?
Um, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I really thought about that, but if I had to answer that, I think I would say that there are probably some ways that you could gauge that. And that would be different with each individual, but that's awareness of trying to figure out, is this a 1 or a 10?
Mm,
Am I spending, all of my time just in a circular kind of thinking? When I know I'm anxious, I'm in a circular thinking. It's like I keep repeating that same worry, right? I just think of it as like I'm in a anxiety dance, and I just keep dancing in a circle, right? I'm just spinning. And when I spin in my head, I know that I need to slow down, and I need to address whatever that is, because that tells me that I'm, anxious. And so that probably varies a great deal from person to person, but that's how I can recognize it. So just starting to try to recognize when you're in that high anxiety level, whether it's, some people have a racing heart, some people, it just depends on how your body lets you know how anxious you are. But yeah, I think that you can, if you do a little introspection, figure
and
that out.
that is an interesting point too. Self-awareness.
Hmm.
How self-aware you are. Do you think that impacts whether you would choose coaching or counseling or no?
Well, I think generally what happens is, for either choice, people reach a level where like they just don't know what else to do.
Mm,
And so, whether they reach out to get counseling or they reach out to get coaching, the most important step, I think you alluded to it in the very beginning, is making that step to do something,
mm,
um, to stop the I'm doing the same thing over and over again and not getting a different result kind of mentality, and the acknowledgement that, gosh, I don't have all the answers, and
mm,
that perhaps I need help to get some different answers.
mm-hmm,
And again,
mm-hmm.
whether that's through counseling or coaching, but it's that first step. That's the biggest step.
Right.
And, fortunately, as a culture, it's become much more acceptable to reach out
Mm.
and get help than it was 20, 30 years ago, and longer. So that's a good thing. I think the thing that works against either option also as a culture is that we're so busy.
Mm. That is true. Yeah, that is true. I want to just mention that I see self-awareness as you're willing to say, why do I do the things I do? And how could I do things differently? And you can for a moment pull yourself out of yourself and kind of watch yourself. I'm not talking
Mhm.
about a serious out of body kind of experience or anything, but you can observe yourself rationally and say, I need to do something different. It's very interesting that and whether it's counseling or coaching, that we have to basically get to the end of ourselves
Mhm.
before we
Mhm.
seek. out that kind of assistance, that kind of care.
And it's such a blessing if you can get to that point and just say, I need some additional thinking on this. I need somebody else to help me, walk alongside in this thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we all know, we could probably think of many people in our lives that repeatedly do the same thing over,
Mm-hmm.
expecting a different result. And I
Yeah,
used to use the analogy as like, why are you beating your head against this brick wall? It's not going to move. And all you're
right.
doing is beating your head against the same brick wall. You have to do something different, right?
Yeah.
If nothing changes, nothing changes. But so to get to that point of making that change, and that is a change just to make that call or just to, investigate counseling or coaching is huge.
Mm. Yeah, I always used to liken it to very similar to you. I'd say, why am I banging my head on this wall? And then I walk around wondering why I have this headache. Why do I
Yeah,
have this headache?
yeah.
And also there is an aspect, and I'm gonna, as a coach, I'm gonna lean on in that direction, because that is what I offer and do, is that coaching is one of the ways we can do self-care.
Hmm.
So you're not out there walking around by yourself. And I don't mean to theologically demean anybody here, but I understand the idea of it's me and Jesus, and, as a leader, and I'm walking with Jesus, and that is very true. But then there's also the need to recognize and see the gifts that other people could bring to us, and that other people and their perspectives are gifts from God to us to walk with us. And those other people can work in an incarnational way. That's, they have skin on, right? And they're walking in tandem with God. They're hearing from the Holy Spirit, and they can be that kind of a spiritual companion on the journey. And it does not demean or mean that your relationship with Jesus is any less than it was beforehand or ever. Um, so I see getting someone on your journey with you as a form of self-care.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And that's something to celebrate when somebody chooses to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to ask you, Patty, and I've tried to do this with everybody, and you'll just have to forgive me. So it was my very first interview, and it was actually a university president. And I asked him if he had anything else he wanted to say. He goes, "Yeah, I want to know why you didn't ask me what makes me crabby, because that's the name of your podcast, is The Crabby Pastor." And I said, "Oh, well, forgive me." So ever since then, I have tried to always ask that. It's not that I'm perfect at this either, but it just dawned on me that I hadn't asked you what makes you crabby. And it's interesting to see what people say with that. And I'm talking away because I'm seeing you think. Nobody else can see you, just me. But so I'm giving you some time by yammering on here for a minute. What makes you crabby, Patty? Oh, that's
Oh,
awful. Crabby Patty. You get
oh, yeah.
SpongeBob, right?
Krabby Patty.
That's funny.
Oh, it is funny. Well, it's not my norm. I can tell you that. It takes a lot for me to get there. And I guess what makes me crabby is when people ask for my help and then they basically don't do anything that you suggest.
Is that a counseling perspective?
No, it doesn't
No,
have to be, but just,
coaching. It could be
I mean,
coaching.
yeah,
They
it
just
doesn't.
don't do anything with what's been uncovered.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, so you say you want this to change. What are you willing to do? And they
Mm-hmm.
come up with something and then they don't do it
Yeah.
repeatedly.
Yeah.
Not once.
Right.
Change is hard and it takes time and you have to practice and all of that. But the person that comes to me over and over again, with the same scenario
Mm-hmm.
and they want to complain about it, but they don't want to do anything about it.
Oh, I see. Well, I know that's like attending a conference and getting your big fat folder, right? Or binder, whatever they're handing out. And then you bring it home and you put it on the shelf and you never like use it.
Right.
Like, it's not like I've never done that. I know I have,
For
but
me either.
yeah, yeah. Well, right. So, yeah, well, okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Um, I should have warned you. My
That's
apologies for
okay.
that. So, anyway, so if you have any other questions about coaching, you can reach out to me at Margie at margiebryce.com. You can find me on Facebook individually or at Self Care and Sustainability, the number 4 Ministry Leaders. And my website is margiebryce.com, and that's BRYCE.com. So you can ask any questions, and a first consultation is always free. So hopefully this has been helpful for you as you are journeying along and as you are seeking to decide what kind of companion you need for your journey. Hey, thanks for listening. It is my deep desire and passion to champion issues of sustainability in ministry and for your life. So I'm here to help. I stepped back from pastoral ministry and I feel called to help ministry leaders create and cultivate sustainability in their lives so that they can go the distance with God and whatever plans that God has for you. I would love to help. I would consider it an honor. And in all things, make sure you connect to these sustainability practices, so that you don't become the crabby pastor.